Hello again, you sick, twisted weather freaks, and welcome to another fun-filled, action-packed, and intellectually stimulating edition of This Week in Weather. I'm your host, meteorologist DT from WX Risk, the commander of chaos, colonel confusion, captain of catastrophe. Let's talk about this week in weather as of August 27th. Yeah, the month is almost over, almost Labor Day, folks. And as we go into Labor Day, we'll be resuming the weather videos on a weekly basis. So that'll be good news for a lot of us as we get ready for the autumn season. And then start talking about winter. And I probably have some winter ideas coming up here around Labor Day weekend or maybe the first week of September. Anyway, so our main topic here is going to be Dorian. We'll talk a little bit about September 2019, but mostly Dorian. So, and as always, we here at Weather Risk, we definitely do thinking out of the box. That's where we don't do the conventional stuff that everybody else does. So, hopefully, I present on this video some information which you may not be aware of, and let you know what more my thinking is with regard to Dorian and how serious a threat it is or is not. All right, right now this here is 11 a.m. advisories. The 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock ones are probably already out when I'm making a video, but as you can see, it's not doing a whole lot of anything. And this shows the Tropical Depression 6 and Dorian. And we'll talk about both of them in a second. And in fact, I just got a chance to take a look at the 5 o'clock advisories here, and there's not much change in either Depression 6 or in Dorian. So it's pretty much as I thought. The system's struggling and it's in trouble. We'll get to that as well. This here is Tropical Depression 6 on the later on, early this morning. You can see where the actual, oops, let me go back. We jumped the gun there. There it is visible. Here's the low-level center I want to show to you in case you didn't see it. See the swirl right there? That's the swirl. So this cloud mass is actually, south of the main feature. So this whole cloud mass in here is south of the main feature. And I think there it is. Yeah, you can see it right here. But this here is the actual center. You see the swirl right there. So that's Tropical Depression 6. And it's going to do this, obviously, and stay well off the coast. It may intensify into a storm, but I think it's more subtropical than anything else. But, that's just my opinion. And my opinion don't matter. I mean, it doesn't matter to me, but nobody else. Anyway, Hurricane Center thinks will be a tropical storm. I think, again, more subtropical than anything else. If we look at the sea surface temperatures, we can use this map here to look at Tropical Depression 6 and Dorian. Of course, and Dorian is right over the Leeward Islands now, as you can see. So we have a lot of the water temperatures here have been stirred up a little bit, so they're actually a little cooler than normal. While Tropical Depression 6 is, they're actually warmer than normal. So that may help the Tropical Depression 6 become that tropical storm. That would be the E storm. All right, and why is it going out to sea? Well, this is just the upper air map here, North America. We can clearly see the feature. This is the upper air feature of Depression 6, as you can see. There it is. And we have this enormous trough coming right through here. You can see this. This is a really nice trough, going to bring in some more cool air into the New England and Mid-Atlantic region. It's pushing southward now with the cold front. The cold front is going like this. If you look on the latest service maps, you'll see the front, something along this line here. So this trough is going to eventually force Tropical Depression 6 out to sea. And we can see that here on this slide here. This is now the GFS valid for 36 hours out. You can see the trough is very strong, quite amplified for this time of year. There it is running right down that way, and that's going to force, there's Depression 6 to go bonkers and do that. So that's what's likely to happen here and to kick it out to sea. All right, let's talk about Dorian here. This was the morning picture. You can see it was actually had a pretty intense burst of convection as across St. Lucia, but it's got problems. Maybe St. Lucia interrupted it. It also has a lot of dry air. You can see the center is very disrupted here a few hours later, and then also here at midday you can see there's a big burst of convection there in the center, but a really disorganized system here. The cloud shield's gotten bigger, and the system has gotten more massive in terms of the overall mass. So that's kind of favorable for intensification. But that's where it stands right now. So not the best looking system in the world. And here's the water vapor. And you can see the problem is the two things. First, it was fairly close to South America, and the Eastern Caribbean area and South America. This whole area is not good for favorable intensifications. And one of the reasons is because if the tropical system is, let me call up a different color marker here so you can see this. If the tropical system is here, let's say, right, it's sucking in land from South America. and you get sucking dry land from the northern coast of South America, and that gets entrained into the system. So here you have Dorian pulling in land, dry air here, and you have dry air. Look at all the dry air right like this, pulling it in. So it's pulling in a lot of dry air, which is causing this system not to strengthen as rapidly as we think. And this was the recon here. You can see this was earlier. The wind's not great. The pressure, I mean, you're getting no rising motion. If you look at P, Q, and R, you're getting no rising motion in the warming in the center at all. Maximum flight level winds 37. I mean, it's barely a storm. 1008. I got to tell you, it's barely a storm. It might not even be that, but they'll keep it that way. I think it's still a storm. It looks like the structure is a storm, but it's not really well organized. We look at other features here. Now, this here is the mid-level shear. You can see, what you want, if you want intensification, you want the system to stay in the greens and the blues. And you can see as it goes up, if the track is correct here, and it takes this track, in this direction, okay, or in this direction, is you have a lot of, relatively non-hostile low wind shear in these areas. So that's good for favorable for intensification. And if you look at the tendencies, we'll see this. Again, the white color represents increasing shear. So here we have, there's a pocket over the Bahamas, north of the Dominican Republic of 30, 40 knots, which is kind of strong. That may not be there in 24 hours, but it's there now. But other than that, there's not too much shear ahead of it. A little bit, but not much. Certainly nothing like we're seeing up in central portions of the U.S. So again, not hostile conditions, not great. If we look at the latest tracks here, now this is the one from last night, and you can see what I want to point out here is look at the bend to the left here a little bit. A lot of people are missing this, and it's really, really important. You can see the track is doing this, and look at the bend here at the end. The bend this way to the left. Okay, a lot of people ignored this little turn here. Most of the models have it, and I think it's important because it shows a threat, I think, into the Gulf of Mexico, and it precludes a bigger change in the track here. This was the European ensemble plots from earlier, and you can see here that it definitely, you can see a lot of the lines here. These spaghetti lines are clearly, you can see all these are turning this direction. You can see a lot of them. Some still turn it this way, but a lot are turning it this way. Now, this turn to the north is not going to happen, and we'll get into that in a second because you can see the high pressure coming in the ridge. But in any event, so this here is now the forecast track here, again, the entire Atlantic basin. And you can see from this morning what the European was doing here was, you notice the track. You see the trend here, look at that, and it bends it this way to the southwest. You see that? I think that's important. There's a reason why the models are doing that, and all showing this bend to the west. And I think it's being overlooked. Now, this is the GFS, and notice it does the same sort of thing. It hooks it to the left, then it turns it up to the north. But as you can see, at 120 hours, it definitely, let me change my markers so you can see this again. Definitely hooks it to the left here a little bit. Right up in this area. See that? It hooks it that way. So I think that's an important trend. All right. This here is the 12. Make sure I didn't jump the gun here. Yeah. This here is the 12Z guidance, and you can clearly see again a hook to the left at the end of all the guidance here. Into the northeast Gulf of Mexico. Now, I think that's too far north. You remember, all of these hurricane models, many of them, I think all of them here, are run off the GFS grid, not the European. So they're all going to, you're likely to get a solution which is closer to the GFS than the European. So these are all the GFS ensemble tracks, and these are the GFS hurricane grid hurricane model tracks, and they're very similar. Here, my next slide here. Now, this is the 12Z European. And again, notice a couple things. First, both of these are showing a pretty big tropical wave coming off the coast of Africa here over the next 10 days, really around September 2nd or 3rd. But again, the European clearly shows this, and then this bend here. See this bend? And it also has it here. And then maybe it maybe splits off in this direction. The European kind of splits it in this area. But you can clearly see that bend to the left. Now, why is it doing that? Well, and before we get to that, this here is the GFS, and you can clearly see the GFS doing the same sort of thing, that bend to the left. If we look at our MJO plots here, and from the month of August, you can clearly see that certain phases are very favorable. Phase 1, phase 2 are very favorable. And then you can see phase 5 is not, phase 4, phase 7 is definitely not. And the reason I bring that up is because these are different MJO plots. We have the Japanese model here in the upper left, the Canadian in the upper right. Notice all of them barely bring it into phase 3 and phase 4. You can see that phase 3, phase 4, almost neutral here on the GFS and on the European. So the Canadian and the Japanese bring it into phase 3 and phase 4. And again, if we go back to this slide here, you can clearly see phase 4, not a lot of Genesis tropical systems developing in phase 4. Phase 3, again, the system is already developed. But the reason why I'm pointing this out is because the MJO here, as you can see, recently has been stuck in the neutral circle. And in the neutral circle, we look at this slide over here, this part of the slide, you can see that there's no tendency that when the MJO is neutral, you have tropical cyclone development all across the Atlantic basin. There's no one area which is favored more than the other. So that's how the MJO being a neutral cycle has helped develop Dorian. The next slide here, of course, if we look at, oops, let me clear this out. This again is our MJO correlation to the tropical activity. Obviously, again, phase 1 and phase 2 and phase 3 where you get the most tropical activity. Right here, phase 1, 2, 3. You can see the number of named storm days and hurricane days, very high here. And ACE is very high here. So we're in phase 2, or we're in phase 3. We're about to go into phase 3 if these other models are correct. If the Japanese and Canadian model are correct, we'll go to phase 3. And that is relatively active, Atlantic basin activity phase 3 here. Phase 4 is not, but for the phase 3 it is. So assuming that it goes into phase 3 and not phase 4, that would support more, Dorian hanging around a little bit, and maybe even allowing for that other wave to come off Africa. If we look at our cluster tracks here, we are clearly, if you look where Dorian formed, let me move this so you can see it actually. Dorian formed here in this area. And if you look at the cluster tracks, you can clearly see going through the Caribbean and into the Gulf of Mexico. So that's pretty clear that's going to do that. Now this is, we look at MJO phase and which cluster favors which one. Remember, we're at phase 3 right now. So phase 3, let me call up my marker here. Phase 3, there it is. And this is the gray area, which is cluster track 3 and then 4. So this case here, this would favor more going towards Florida. And that's one of the reasons why the models may be having a trouble with this, because we have a split in the track, and you'll see that in the ensembles. Is it going to go up to Florida and then, let's say, into South Carolina, Georgia, or is it going to hook to the left and go into the Gulf of Mexico? All right, if we listen to the GFS ensemble from yesterday, and what happens is we can clearly see that we have the Atlantic Ridge here by Friday evening building in with the Southwest Ridge over California and Arizona. And what you end up getting is a big, here's our trough, which comes through, okay, and then the trough moves away to eastern Canada. So this ridge, look how far the western flank of this ridge builds in. See that? It really builds in here. And these two features end up linking up into one big giant ridge, which makes it pretty hot over the southern half of the U.S. for mid-September, but it prevents Dorian from coming further north. And you can see that clearly here. So this is, you can clearly, very pronounced linkage here. We have the dome over the southwestern states, and we have the western Atlantic Ridge, or the Bermuda High, you call it the Bermuda High, and these two features. And this here is where Dorian might be. And you can see it's not going to come in this gap here. It's going to be forced to turn in that direction if this is correct. All right, this was the ensembles from yesterday, the GFS. This is the 12Z. Notice this enormous high, very powerful this time of year, really nice here, coming in for the weekend. Okay, and then you can see the cluster of where the low pressure area is on Dorian. And then notice yesterday you had two clusters, Georgia and the Gulf of Mexico. Okay, this would be cluster track. This would be cluster track 3, and this would be cluster track 4. So remember, you got two areas here in Georgia and Florida, and you can that would be, I believe, yeah. There's cluster 3 and cluster 4. So cluster 3 track, those go up the southeast coast into Georgia or Florida, and cluster 4 is the Caribbean Gulf of Mexico. So a big split there. This was the European model, same sort of thing. We have the enormous high here. You can see over Wisconsin on Friday, which moves to New England, and then the cluster of the activity is clearly over the Gulf of Mexico and the European. That was yesterday's European. Now this is the afternoon GFS 12Z run this Tuesday, and you can clearly see much greater agreement here in the Gulf of Mexico over central and southwest Florida. Okay, you don't have two clusters anymore, folks. You see that? You don't have that. And then you have one big cluster here of activity in the central Gulf of Mexico. So if Dorian gets into the central Gulf of Mexico, it's going to become a lot more threatening, I think, a bigger storm. That's what I'm worried about here down the road. This is the 12Z European, excuse me, this is the European ensemble from Tuesday morning. Let me get that right. And you can clearly see, let's see, on one of the upper right is 90 hours. So let's talk about this one right here. And there's our trough, right, like this. Now this feature here, that represents the upper air feature of Dorian. Now that may be too far south, but you can see the ridge just like this. Okay, so Dorian has to break through that ridge, and when the trough lifts out, that doesn't happen. The trough is now over here, 120 hours out, and look at the western flank of the Bermuda High, pushing all the way that way. That's going to force Dorian, I think, to turn to the west into the Gulf of Mexico. I could be wrong, but that's how I see it. Slide now next here with this slide here shows us the height anomalies and how they increase. So the upper left is for Friday morning. So you can see the height anomalies a little above normal right in this area here in the western Atlantic Ocean. Oops, let me call it up. Right here. Okay. And this here is Dorian. Now look what happens only 36 hours later. This is Saturday afternoon. Huge increase in anomalies. Oh, and that's the Bermuda High, and that forces Dorian to turn to the left. It has to. It's just basic meteorology, and you can see that very clearly. So that's how I see it happening. All right. In summary, so Dorian is struggling, showing some signs of improvement, but you know it's got issues. A lot of dry air around. It's going to hit Puerto Rico or the extreme eastern part of the Dominican Republic. I don't know that yet. A lot of people think it's going to go cut Puerto Rico. It might go through the Windward Passage. We'll see. It's going to turn to the west, or maybe even west-southwest, near or over central southern Florida, in my view. I don't know if it's going to become that big of a storm and it goes to the Bahamas. It'll probably be a little stronger. May make hurricane strength. My concern is if Dorian gets into the east central Gulf, not the Florida Panhandle. I'm talking about the real east central Gulf. You know, like we saw up here on the GFS ensemble here. You can see it getting into the central Gulf here. If that happens, Dorian could go boom. And then finally, the European shows a significant, East African wave, what we used to call the tropical wave, coming off southwest coast of Africa, September 2nd, 3rd, or 4th. That one has to be watched carefully as well. If the MJO stays weak and does not go into phase 4 or 5, it has a chance to develop. If the MJO goes into those phases, like the Japanese and Canadian model is showing, that tropical wave may die. So we'll see. Anyway, this is meteorologist DT from Weather Risk. I'll probably do another video. I'm thinking either Thursday or Friday afternoon. And like I said, after the Labor Day holiday, I'll do my first look at the winter and see what, if anything, we can figure out is going to happen with that. This is meteorologist DT from Weather Risk. I'll talk to you soon.